I am Justin Jander. I lead the product management team for our revenue management, and perhaps we should rename it to the offer optimization products. And so what I'm going to walk through today is really starting to talk about what we mean by offer optimization. And you probably can tell through the different sessions so far today, we've been drilling down further and further, right? So the keynote started talking at things super high level. Sarain's presentation talked about it in a little more detail. During the panel, we kind of got into more detail. And so now I want to talk specifically about the things that matter from an offer optimization standpoint. So when you think about offer optimization, there's a lot of words that get thrown around that matter and may not matter to what we're talking about. And those can be things like bundling, AI is obviously prevalent, ancillaries, willingness to pay, dynamic pricing, class-free, workflow is important. All of those things really do make up the concept of dynamic pricing. And so when we think of, offer optimization. So when we think about what we mean by offer optimization, we really need to start with the fundamentals of the product. And so why is Pros poised to kind of be the leader of offer optimization? And that's really because of the key tenets that we have. And I mentioned this in an earlier presentation, but really the core fundamental of Pros revenue management and now offer optimization is artificial intelligence or science, data science, really driving home the point of understanding the use of data in making decisions and using that to understand the passenger behavior and ultimately coming up with the right price. It, of course, has to be modular and cloud-based. That's a technology concept, but, of course, technology needs to match the capabilities that we have from what we desire for a product standpoint. And then we need to be customer-centric. And that's been a key theme that you've heard throughout the day-to-day, but this is understanding the passenger behavior, the customer behavior, and ensuring that we can understand that and price accordingly. And then the third is we have experience navigating this world of black boxes. This is a common theme that's talked about. A lot of people like to throw around the term black box, and really science in general, and it has always been kind of labeled as a black box. And whether it's data science from 20 years ago or whether it's now the hot new topics of AI and neural networks and et cetera are all kind of black boxes in and of themselves. And so really the concept is that you put a lot of stuff into a box and out pops an answer. And that isn't changing. The science is doing that. I think the key here is what you do with that information, how you present it, how you understand what went in and understand what came out. And it's, part of that is understanding the fundamental models that are underneath, but part of that's also just understanding the concepts that come out, visualizations that come out so you understand how to interact with the science. And I think that's a key component that we bring to the table from the pros side. So to start off, let's define offer optimization. It's the right product for the right customer at the right price at the right time. All right, nobody laughed, but earlier Amit on stage told us that we have to stop using this terminology, and indeed we didn't coordinate very well because this is the fundamental of my presentation. However, if you do Google revenue management, that's exactly what comes up. This definition has long been around forever. If you go to Wikipedia, this is literally in the first paragraph of revenue management is right product, right customer, right price, right time. So that's been the fundamental of what we've been doing since the mid-'80s when revenue management really took off. So why am I suggesting that the offer optimization is this same set of characteristics? Well, hopefully that's what you're going to come out of this presentation knowing. So let's start with right product. On the revenue management side, right product really is focused on class-based revenue management. So this is understanding how many passengers want to fly at a given class and really focused on just the right to fly component. So not focusing too much on ancillaries, maybe a bit with the bundling capabilities and branded fares, but really revenue management is limited to class-based forecasting and optimization, and that's really where the kind of barrier lies. And so when we think of a product, I think of the whole thing where I used to say all the time that I'm a passenger and I have a big Q stamped on my forehead, and that means I'm going to buy Q class. Well, times have changed, right? Nobody has a big Q stamped on their forehead. Instead, what they have is a willingness to pay for a particular product. Now, the definition of product really is important inside of the offer optimization space. Now, it's no longer just the right to fly, as we kind of commonly defined it in revenue management, but now it's the right to fly plus the ancillaries that matter to me, that complete the travel experience for me. And so really this comes in down to what matters most to me as the traveler that completes my travel experience. And that's why you hear a lot, we've heard the term offer being thrown around all day today, and it isn't that complicated. It really is just all the things that I need to complete my travel experience. Now, most of you are airlines, and so the most important thing to you as the airline is getting somebody to sit in a seat on the airplane. But really, you've seen the opportunity go beyond that with seat selection, and I mentioned earlier today, seat selection alone contributes to $4.2 billion in the just 8 domestic airlines in the U.S. So there's huge opportunity in seat selection, bags, the kind of typical things you think of with revenue management and with ancillaries. But now, really where the opportunity lies is when I go to book a ticket, it's not really, and some of you as airline employees may not like this so much, but when I go to book a ticket, I don't actually book it because I want to fly your airline. Now, I actually might do that, but most of your passengers don't actually do that. They want to get to the destination or they want to get home. That's what matters to them. So you're a means for that part of the puzzle. But the next step in the puzzle is really what else makes it up. So that's the hotel, that's the car rental, that's all of the different components. And as I mentioned earlier today, that's also sunglasses being sent to your destination and really turning into a retailer where you're one piece of that puzzle. So that's what we mean by offer, is thinking of that. Now, does that mean you have to go from what you're doing today to completely doing that full-blown retailing tomorrow? No, definitely not. But there's opportunities, and that's where you want to go as an airline and as a retailer. So the next step is right customer. So in the revenue management space, right customer was limited to some basic segmentation. O&D, point of sale, was probably the most advanced you can get. So with an availability tool like RTDP, those types of tools allow you to do differentiated availability by O&D point of sale, some channel availability management, so you can determine availability by channel, but it was really limited to basic segmentation. So nothing too advanced in what you know about your passenger. Now, if you compare what we're doing in RTDP today to what we were doing 20 years ago, where it was leg AUs, we've come a long way in terms of passenger segmentation, knowing more about our customer. Think about the introduction of point-of-sale fares that we have in place. That was a huge, huge way to actually differentiate. And now all of us can see the difference. If you're flying Europe to the U.S. versus U.S. to Europe, you can see that point-of-sale differentiation is alive and well. That was the means of customer identification at the time. When we think of offer optimization, it's much more advanced than that. So we're talking more about leveraging more data, understanding who the passenger is, and really focusing on the channel that they're buying, but also all the details that we can get about the passenger. And that's what makes up the offer piece of offer optimization. That's the next step in terms of right customer. So then when we talk about right price, so in the historical, there's not much to it. In today's world, it's availability. That's pretty much the basics that you have. Class availability is what you get. So if Q class is available, that's what you put on the market. You may get a little bit of flexibility with some ATPCO fare rules. You might have some layers of inside of that. But generally speaking, it's still fixed price points at an RBD fare basis code level. So pretty rigid in terms of its flexibility. Of course, I mentioned this earlier. I'll tell my joke one more time. If any of you were in an economics class and you're learning about the relationship between supply and demand, and you were asked to draw a price-demand curve, none of you would have said, okay, Q gets 10 units of demand at this price, and M. Nobody would have done that. You would have drawn a nice exponential curve. Well, that's what we need to start looking towards when we go to the future. And really, it's about continuous pricing. So now not being limited to the fare basis group, to the fare classes. And then it's also about understanding the context of the passenger. So actually understanding who the passenger is. That goes back to the customer piece. But now when I know the customer, I can apply a request-specific price to that particular passenger. And that sounds really scary to some people who maybe aren't in the airline industry, of like Justin's going to get a different price than somebody else. But today you're already doing that. I mentioned point of sale is one element that you're doing today. What we're talking about here is the holy grail of revenue management, when we all were first introduced to it, was trying to identify business versus leisure passengers. And that was really the main thing, because historically business travelers are willing to pay more than leisure. And that was done with basic segmentation. You know, closer to departure, you want to close off classes so we make people pay more. That was one way. And then maybe you could try to do some Saturday night stays versus length of stay. Those types of things could tell you a bit more about the passenger. But there's a lot more that we can do. Number of people in the record is one of the biggest drivers of business versus leisure. If somebody's booking 4 passengers in the record, it's pretty much a guarantee that they're not traveling for business, right? Now, that's blurred a little bit these days with the blended leisure travel that's happening, but still, the general characteristics, you're looking to identify and segment those passengers with as much information as you can. And then you pair that with the ancillary pricing, so again, knowing the passenger, understanding the segmentation, and then providing a price that makes the most sense for that passenger. And then ultimately pairing the price for the flight with the price of the ancillary, pairing those things together into an offer price. Ultimately understanding everything there is to know about the passenger so that you can determine the right price. So the example that I always give with this is, suppose that we have 2 passengers. One is willing to pay $100 for the seat and $50 in ancillary, so they make up $150 in total revenue for me. Another passenger is willing to pay $125 for the seat, but will not pay anything for ancillaries. At that point, if the bid price is $110 in this example, we'll turn away the passenger who was going to give you $150. You're going to tell him nope, and you're going to instead offer the passenger that was willing to pay $125. In that case, you've lost $25 in incremental revenue. That's where the opportunity for offer pricing really comes in. But it's a lot harder problem to solve. What I just described is really easy if everybody just raises their hand, shows up at exactly the same time, tells you exactly what they're willing to pay for both pieces, and then you offer them that set. But the reality of the situation is you have to know who's coming at some point in the future, and it's not even that easy because I might be worth $50 in ancillaries, but I'm not actually giving you the chance to that money for those ancillaries until departure. So I haven't even gotten the chance. You collected the $100 from me on the hope that I will actually pay you the remaining $50. So that's where our offer marketing friends come in to make sure that if I told you, or if I think you're going to spend $50 extra, I really better offer you as much as I can to get you to spend that $50 extra. So really there's a lot of moving parts that happen when we talk about the offer pricing, and that's why bundling is the first step. If we create the bundle of products together and price that bundle, where the bundle is aware of what itinerary you selected, then you have much more information about the passenger and you're creating a bundle which truly is the offer. But we haven't quite gotten to that step of truly understanding the total value of the passenger, and that's where we get into the next step. And that's what Pros is researching right now. And as I talked about a bit earlier today, a lot of times we set our goal of we want to be here by 2030, and we get into this cycle of just trying to figure out what to do between now and 2030 that we don't do anything. And I think that really, while it sounds really good to get to that end goal, there have to be steps along the way that you can get to with like willingness to pay, with bid price control I mentioned before. All of these things start to come to play as getting towards that offer optimization picture. And that's something that's important to me. I'm obviously involved in the revenue management space for a long time, and I'm making this transition to the offer optimization space. But I think it's important that we recognize that you're not going to go in a day and get all of this capability. Most of you have a lot of challenges outside of revenue management to make all of that happen, and so you've got to start setting the path to get there as you go. Last piece is right time, and so, of course, with right time in revenue management space, it was basically days prior. That was the main driver you had to segment passengers, was based off of days prior, so you might change the price or change availability as you get closer to departure, for example. So pretty much basic segmentation with days prior. With offer optimization, now we have multiple opportunities to come back and present you information. So whether that means you booked 100 days out and you're coming back now at 5 days before departure and sending me an email to buy something else, those are the multiple touch points we have, and we have to continue with those to understand the willingness to pay at each of those points and drive that behavior, drive that understanding to ultimately present the right price to the passenger. So in kind of summary there, the difference between what we said before, so hopefully in 20 years there'll be a Wikipedia page that says offer optimization, and that revenue management Wikipedia page has been deleted and it's gone and nobody ever references that, but the same first paragraph will be the same. Right price, right product, right time, right customer. But the difference is what we mean by those terms, and I think that's really important. So I might be a little bit different than what Amit was saying in his presentation, but I think it's important that we don't focus on what those meant before, but start changing the strategy to what we really mean by product as an airline and customer as an airline, price and time, and think of it that way. And of course, putting the whole thing with a wrapper of AI around it. So when we think about what that looks like from a pro's perspective, I just want to hit on a few of the key pillars that we see towards offer optimization. So the first is a core revenue management concept. So I've just said that revenue management hopefully goes away in 20 years, but the core focus of revenue management is understanding a capacity constraint. So this is the basics of revenue management, is saying I have more demand than there is capacity, and so how much is that extra demand worth to me? How much is the capacity that I have worth so that I take the right set of passengers? That's the fundamental baseline, is just understanding that relationship between price and demand such that and layering in the capacity component. I actually tell people this all the time, that revenue management isn't more than just supply and demand. It's just two curves that cross. It's just, unfortunately, you have a lot of supply with hundreds of aircrafts flying all over the world, and you have a lot of demand with millions of passengers over the course of a year. So it's more complicated than just your basic supply and demand curve, pick the price where it meets. But the fundamentals need to start with understanding that relationship between supply and demand. Once you have that, you can calculate the bid price, and you start with an understanding of willingness to pay in that case as well. The second piece is the price component. So once you understand the capacity constraint, now you have to layer in, how do I actually price that? And the pricing component is largely dependent on willingness to pay. So now you have a capacity constraint, you have a passenger's willingness to pay, and I need to pair those together to get a price. Now I always use this example because just because the capacity constraint is zero doesn't mean you should charge $0, right? None of you would do that, right? So if you have a plane that's not going to go full, how many of you would just give away tickets for that flight? Nobody, right? That doesn't happen. Instead, you actually do still need to understand the willingness to pay of passengers and decide what's the right mix of passengers to take such that I maximize my revenue. So that's where the willingness to pay plus the capacity constraint come together to determine a price. Now that's done in today's world, that's done with availability. But in tomorrow's world, we start talking about continuous pricing. So this is being able to get a price in between two filed fares. Now, again, if we were going to where we want to be, we would never start with this idea of pricing in between two filed fares. But the infrastructure that you have set up is all still very class-based. So we're going with this approach that starts with, what's the right price, given the willingness to pay, what's the right price in between two filed fares? But then we can take the next step and go to this idea called request-specific pricing. And request-specific pricing, it's aptly named, is it's pricing based off of the context of the request. So who is the passenger that's making the request? What are the details of that request? Now, that doesn't mean it's individualized pricing. That doesn't mean each person gets a different price, but instead we're looking for segmentation and understanding the segmentation that's happening and fitting the right passenger into that proper segment based off of their characteristics. So this can be, I use some examples here you can see, but like things like trip features where that used to be in the filed fares, like round trip and one way, those now can be captured as part of the pricing itself. So today you have pricers that actually are saying, okay, I'm going to file one Q fare that's round trip and another Q fare that's one way, and those get different fare basis codes. We want to eliminate that part and actually model the behavior and say there's more willingness to pay for a one-way, thus justifying a higher price. And that can be customer features as well. So this can be the number of passengers in the request. This can be things like their frequent flyer tier, loyalty, balance, those kinds of things. And then it gets interesting from there. And I use weather as an example because we hear this often from revenue management departments that they say, you know, especially for some that are in cold weather climates that fly to less cold weather places, they have things where they see typically, when there is the first snow of the year, they see a ton of demand spike for all of the warm weather destinations they fly to. So it's not specific to one O&D or two O&Ds. It's broadly a characteristic. And I think that's where we can actually say, at the time of the request, what's the weather in the place where you're requesting? Now, this sounds really like out there, and that's why this is part of a presentation that's not just where you can go today, but where we can go tomorrow. And this is really illustrating where the data can start facilitating more use of the, we can facilitate more, using the data, we can facilitate broader pictures using more information to make better decisions in the process. And the last piece is the ancillary science, and this is where we have ranking or bundling and pricing of the ancillary component. So ranking is the way that you show the ancillaries for on your website. So this is, again, if you have 10 ancillaries to offer a passenger, the way that you present them, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm booking a ticket and I'm scrolling through your list of ancillaries that you have, by the time I get to the 10th one, I have no chance of buying that. I'm tired of scrolling. The first 2 or 3, those are the ones that I'm most likely to buy. That behavior is what we're trying to capitalize on here. Understand who the passenger is and present the right ancillaries up front first. So it's not really a revenue play per se, it's a conversion play. They have the extra money in their wallet. Now it's just a matter of showing something to them in a way that makes the most sense. Bundling is sort of taking that idea, but then combining together ancillaries that make the most sense to that passenger. So even bundling alone, without any adjustment to price, just bundling can actually increase conversion. Just combining and say you get bag and Wi-Fi together, but it's the same price, people are actually more likely to convert in those cases. Now, some of you may have data that suggests otherwise. It's a controversial opinion. But then that takes you to the pricing step. And that's where you can actually understand the willingness to pay for the passenger for those ancillaries and use that information to drive the decision that we had. And that's the demo that we saw this morning in the keynote. And so just to illustrate, too, where the kind of products lie at Pros, the revenue management capability is our Pros RM solution. So that's RM Essentials, RM Advantage are really focused on that RM capability. Pros RTDP, real-time dynamic pricing, is powering our dynamic pricing capability, as the name would imply. And then Pros Dynamic Ancillary Science is our product that we use for the dynamic ancillary science piece. All these products obviously talk to each other, and they're built on that platform that we talked about this morning. So really it's all about sharing data between them, but we do have this differentiated thing. And that's important from that modularization perspective that we talked about. You don't have to have all 3. You can start with any of them and build up to them. So that's an important part that you may not need, you may not be ready for all of the components, but there's different opportunities that you can use at different points. And that's why that modularization piece is really important. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is really on completing the offer optimization or offer picture. So today we use the term offer management across this. And really there's a few other key components that finalize the offer. So I brought the focus of revenue management. So that's what I've been doing for 13 years. That's my focus. But as I've met more and kind of understand the full picture, it's become clear that there's more to it. If in a vacuum, if revenue management comes up with the price, that's the easy part, right? Well, some of you may disagree, but that's one part that's generally, you kind of get in the vacuum, create the price. Now you actually need to execute on that price, get it out to the market, and create something called an offer. So there's a few components to that. It's really the inventory of the offer. So that means making sure that you understand how many seats you have left, because that's a critical component of being able to create an offer. And then also having as much content for those ancillaries as possible. So we've talked a lot about sunglasses and sunscreen and socks again. We've talked about all of those as being potential ancillaries for the airline. But of course, if you're going to do that, you as the airline need to have that inventory available to sell. It's easy for me to say, hey, sell some socks on your website. But it's harder to actually find a vendor that wants you to promote their sock, sell the sock, and execute on that order. And that's really where the order piece comes in that we've been talking about, is make one order and turn that into something that can be fulfilled across the board. The next step is offer distribution. So of course, now you come up with this great offer. You've got all the pieces that you need. You come up with that great offer, but you can only get it to your direct channel. Well, that's a problem, right? Now you have a whole bunch of other channels. Now, of course, I'm sure all of you would prefer everybody come to your direct channel, but that's not realistic, right? And so now you have to be able to take that offer you created and get it to all the right channels and be able to have all the right content as part of that. So if one channel can't support sunglasses in the offer, well, then that channel can't complete the full offer picture that you came up with for that airline. And that's why having the right content and the right distribution approach really matter in the offer itself. Then there's offer presentation, and this is twofold. This is one is your airline.com, so what you control for the offer. So putting the right information on the page, that can be the ranking of the ancillaries, that can be the way you deliver the price, so how you visualize the different price components, the itineraries, etc. But then it's also the offer marketing piece, and that's what we've heard from our colleagues at Everymundo today, is really spreading the word. How do you get the message out about it? So how do you actually tell people that you have a price if you never show it to them? And so those are the two components from the offer presentation. And then there's the offer tracking. So great, you've come up with this offer, you've sold it, or you've put it out in front of somebody. Does anybody actually buy it? Does anybody touch that offer? Or is it just ignored entirely? Understanding what the interaction was with the offer and applying science to that is critical to having that feedback loop, so that way you actually know, what should I offer different next time? And so that really completes the picture. And just to kind of add to it from where we stand, you've heard a lot of different kind of capabilities and products today. We have our order management capability that Chris talked about today. And that's where we're trying to really complete the ownership of the inventory, creating the offer, owning the offer, and making sure that we can turn it into an order. Then there's our product dynamic offers, which has a merchandising component. So that's all about bringing in all the right ancillaries. The offer distribution is all about our shopping and merchandising capability to distribute the offer, whether that's NDC or all the other channels that you have. We have a digital retail solution, which is the airline's website. And then our offer marketing capabilities through EveryMundo. And then ultimately with the offer tracking is really offer and order management, putting it all together into the whole platform capability that we're talking about. So just in case you wanted to learn more, there's a few extra sessions that you can come and find out about. Rachel Golden is our product manager for revenue management. She's going to be talking about the innovations and the roadmap specifically on those revenue management capabilities. That's tomorrow. This afternoon, Paul Holler will be talking about RTDP and DP and dynamic pricing of ancillaries. So that's really talking about that dynamic pricing and the ancillary pricing components. And then tomorrow at 1:15, Chris and Mitko will be talking about the order and offer components, so the offer creation and ultimately into the order piece. So that's what I had for you today. Thank you very much, and look forward to getting your feedback.